Vinland Saga, at its core, is not just a tale of warriors or conquest. It's a meditation on the inescapable cycle of violence. A cycle that devours generations, turning grief into rage and rage into legacy. It shows how violence is never self-contained. It echoes, mutates, and consumes. The first arc of the series captures this theme with devastating precision, framing its narrative through two men locked on opposite ends of that spiral. Thorfinn, a boy hurled into brutality after witnessing the senseless death of his father, and Askeladd, a man who has lived long enough to understand that survival often means becoming the monster you once feared. These two aren't just hero and villain, they're mirrors of each other, walking the same road at different stages. And what makes Vinland Saga brilliant is how their arcs reach their emotional peak in a single, shared scene. It's not just the best moment in the series. I'd argue it's one of the greatest scenes in all of anime, and maybe even across any storytelling medium I've seen. Heads up, this video contains major spoilers. If you haven't watched or read Vinland Saga yet, I seriously recommend you do so first. Trust me. It hits harder when you come in fresh, feel everything, and then come back here for the closure a good video essay can provide. To fully understand what makes that pivotal scene so powerful, we need to recap the story, specifically from the perspectives of the main character, Thorfinn, and the main antagonist, Askeladd. These won't be full summaries, just the essential threads you need to grasp who these characters are and how they collide. Thorfinn's story begins in the frozen quiet of Iceland. As a child, he is bright-eyed and full of wonder, untouched by the chaos of the outside world. Life is hard, winters are cruel, the land offers little. But in the warmth of his family, especially his father Thor's, he finds peace. But Thor's is no ordinary man. He was once known across the world as the greatest warrior alive, a man who walked through battlefields like a ghost of death. And yet, at the peak of his power, Thor's made a radical choice. He vanished. He faked his death, abandoned the title of warrior, and fled the life of bloodshed to raise a family in peace. This wasn't cowardice. It was conviction. He believed that true strength lay not in killing, but in restraint. It was the most dangerous kind of rebellion, moral clarity in a world addicted to violence. That peace doesn't last. Word of Thor's survival reaches Floki, a petty and prideful man from the Jomsvikings. Floki has always been haunted by Thor's strength. To him, Thor's wasn't just stronger, he was better. That silent superiority gnawed at Floki, who mistakes virtue for mockery. But Floki is no warrior, so rather than face Thor's himself, he hires a mercenary to do it for him, Askeladd. The trap is simple. Floki summons Thor's back under the pretense of rejoining the Jomsvikings. Thor's agrees reluctantly, hoping, perhaps, to resolve things peacefully. But Thorfinn, full of boyish dreams, stows away on the ship, craving adventure. What he gets is something else entirely. When Askeladd's ambush comes, Thor's fights like a force of nature. Unarmed, he defeats dozens. Even Askeladd, sly, brutal, skilled, is no match for him in a fair duel. But Thor's doesn't kill. Not even now. He spares Askeladd, true to his ideals. That mercy becomes his undoing. Askeladd's second-in-command Bjorn takes Thorfinn hostage. And without hesitation, Thor's makes a choice. He drops his blade and accepts death to save his son. It's not just a tragedy, it's the death of everything Thorfinn believed in. Thorfinn's heart shatters. His father died not because Askeladd was stronger, but because Thorfinn was weak. He disobeyed. He was reckless. And he made Thor's hesitate. The guilt curdles into hatred, not just for Askeladd, but for himself. But Thorfinn doesn't want revenge. He wants redemption. He follows Askeladd not to murder him in cold blood, but to earn the right to kill him in a duel. He wants to defeat him in combat, man to man, to prove that he is no longer weak, no longer a boy, no longer a burden. 2. This is the beginning of Thorfinn's descent into a world of hate, a life defined by the man he wishes to kill and the man he can never become again. Chained by vengeance, Thorfinn joins Askeladd's band of Vikings with one goal: to one day kill the man who murdered his father, but not through assassination or cowardice. Thorfinn wants an honorable duel, a clean victory that proves he is the stronger man. His first duel, waged as a child, ends in predictable failure. The loss burns deeply. And from that moment on, Thorfinn commits himself to the sword. He grows into a fearsome warrior, hardened by years of raiding and killing. In his pursuit of strength, he leaves behind a trail of blood, villages sacked, innocents slaughtered, all in service of a single hollow purpose. Even after becoming a seasoned killer, Thorfinn loses again in his second duel with Askeladd. His rage, his obsession blinds him. Twice now, his life's one desire has slipped through his fingers. Desperate, he begs Askeladd for another chance. Askeladd, ever cunning, exploits Thorfinn's obsession. He tells the boy to defeat the most powerful warrior in Britannia, Thorkel the Tall. Thorfinn challenges Thorkel and loses, but not without making an impression. He takes off a few of Thorkel's fingers mid-battle, something no one has done before. Amused and excited, Thorkel lets him live, hoping for a rematch someday. To Thorkel, war is a game, and Thorfinn has just made it interesting. Afterward, as Thorfinn and Askeladd flee from London, King Sweyn makes a ruthless move. He commands his own son, Prince Canute, to remain with a small force to gain experience. In truth, it's a death sentence. The king hopes Thorkel will kill his timid, disappointing heir. Instead, Canute is captured. One of the few survivors of Canute's guard finds Askeladd and pleads for help. Seeing an opportunity to gain favor with the crown, Askeladd kills the messenger, ensuring no one else can steal the glory. He sends Thorfinn to retrieve the prince and succeeds in doing so. But they now face an impossible enemy in Thorkel. To escape, Askeladd leads the group into the harsh, snowy wilderness of Wales. Food dwindles. Morale withers. In desperation, Askeladd raids a nearby village. But stealing their food isn't enough. He orders the slaughter of every man, woman, and child. It's another monstrous act added to Askeladd's ledger, and another reason for Thorfinn to hate him. One girl survives and warns a neighboring village. Word spreads, and it reaches Thorkel. The chase begins. When Thorkel catches up, it leads to an unexpected duel. Not between Thorkel and Askeladd, but between Thorkel and Thorfinn, who refuses to let anyone else kill his father's murderer. That honor is his alone. With Askeladd's guidance during the fight, too, Thorfinn defeats the seemingly invincible Thorkel. For the first time, he stands victorious against overwhelming odds. Askeladd keeps his word. A third duel is promised once they return to safety. And with that, Thorfinn inches closer to the vengeance that defines his existence, still unaware of the cost that obsession continues to demand. The third duel and the collapse of purpose. Thorfinn waits patiently for Askeladd's wounds to heal before challenging him to a third duel. But in his obsession, he doesn't wait for his own body to recover. His arm is still badly injured. He fights half, broken, as if sheer willpower will be enough to carry him through. Then, Askeladd does something completely unexpected. He throws away his sword. Standing before a vengeful Thorfinn, who has now defeated warriors like Thorkel the Tall, arguably the strongest man alive, Askeladd disarms himself. It isn't arrogance, it's clarity. He's never seen Thorfinn as a true opponent. Not because Thorfinn is weak, but because Thorfinn fights with nothing but rage. Thorfinn charges, blinded by emotion, just like every time before. And just like every time, Askeladd effortlessly outmaneuvers him. Despite all his years of violence, all his battles and scars, Thorfinn still doesn't understand one thing's strength without purpose is just fury. He loses the duel again. This time to an unarmed man, and it shatters him. This third defeat isn't just another loss. It leaves Thorfinn hollow. Everything he lived for, revenge, glory, closure, is gone. He couldn't avenge his father. He couldn't kill Askeladd. And worst of all, he realizes that he hasn't grown. He's still the same angry, lost boy who watched his father die, Directionless and broken, Thorfinn lashes out. After a meaningless fight with some random Vikings, he ends up in jail. It's there that Leif Erikson, a merchant and old friend from his childhood in Iceland, finds him. Leif offers a way out, a chance to finally go home, to see his family, to start over. Thorfinn steps onto the ship inches away from freedom, but something stops him. The hatred still lingers toward Askeladd, toward himself, toward everything unresolved. He can't leave, not yet. That old wound is still bleeding. The revenge he failed to claim still owns him. So, once again, Thorfinn turns away from peace. He walks back into the darkness, chasing a man who no longer fears him, and a purpose that's already fading. The ash-covered child. Askeladd was born the illegitimate son of a Viking warlord named Olaf and a Welsh slave woman named Lydia. Though Lydia was once Olaf's favored concubine, her fate changed the moment she fell ill. No longer of use, she was cast aside, banished to a barn with her young son like discarded cattle. To survive, young Askeladd worked day and night. He toiled so relentlessly that others began calling him Askeladd, meaning covered in ash, a nickname earned from the soot and grime that clung to him from the forge and the hearth. His real name is never revealed, perhaps lost, perhaps discarded, just like the boy himself. Lydia, in her fevered delusion, one day mistook Olaf for Artorius, the legendary Welsh hero who would return to save his people. She reached out to him, trembling and hopeful. In response, Olaf drew his sword to strike her down for the insult, but Askeladd stood between them. The boy, barely more than a child, drew steel against his father. Their duel was brief but intense. Impressed by Askeladd's skill and tenacity, Olaf spared him and began treating him as one of his real sons, seeing in him the makings of a warrior. But Askeladd had already seen the truth. To him, the world was a pit of filth. The Danes, his father's people, were nothing but savages who glorified violence, betrayed loyalty, and lived by lust and greed. They abused his mother. They only respected him when he wielded violence for their gain. Psychologists today might say this was the origin of antisocial personality disorder, when a child is raised in cruelty. They often grow unable to see people as individuals, only as parts of a collective they distrust or despise. Askeladd came to view all Danes as monsters, and that included himself. He was half Danish, after all, half monster. Like Thorfinn, Askeladd carried a hatred that wasn't just for others. It was deeply rooted in self-loathing. He, too, had a father figure he needed to destroy. But unlike Thorfinn, Askeladd didn't need honor, he needed results. So he became a Viking. He played the game. He killed, looted, deceived, until he earned Olaf's trust. Then, one day, he slit his father's throat with his brother's sword. That brother was later murdered by their other siblings, enraged by the betrayal. But Askeladd didn't grieve. To him, they were just more Danes, and he hated all Danes equally. Ashes of the father, seeds of the King Askeladd, a cunning Viking warlord, inherited his father's wealth with a twisted sense of purpose. Unlike his father, who lived only for conquest and lust, Askeladd sought something greater. He would use his blood-soaked path through war and pillage to one day protect the only people he ever truly cared about, the Welsh. His mother's people. Lydia, his mother, had been the single ray of light in his bleak existence, and he refused to let her memory fade into insignificance. To fulfill this goal, Askeladd spent years as a ruthless Viking, killing both guilty and innocent alike. In his quest for strength and political leverage, he became the very thing he once despised. He even assassinated Thorfinn's father, a noble warrior and pacifist, for coin. In doing so, he completed his transformation into the evil father figure he had once sworn to destroy, perpetuating the cycle of hatred and vengeance. Despite his countless sins, Askeladd's dream of saving Wales remained distant. Years of murder and plunder had brought him wealth, but not the influence he needed. That changed when he received news Prince Canute had been captured during battle with Thorkel's forces. Askeladd saw opportunity. A royal figure, pliable and naive, was a piece he could shape into a ruler capable of preserving peace. And Wales. Without hesitation, Askeladd killed the messenger to ensure he alone could rescue the prince and reap the rewards. Once Canute was in his hands, he led the group through the snow-covered mountains of Wales, claiming it was out of respect for the Welsh. But in truth, it was strategy. Avoiding the seas reduced visibility, and traveling through Wales forced the prince to face his weaknesses. Askeladd sought to make Canute sign a peace treaty with the Welsh, betting on the boy's distaste for violence. Unlike King Sweyn, who betrayed treaties for gain, Canute might be swayed into honor. To convince the Welsh, Askeladd even claimed lineage from the legendary Artorius, a bold lie that resonated deeply with the local king. The Welsh, believing Askeladd more kin than enemy, agreed to the alliance. But the journey grew desperate. Food dwindled, and with his men starving, Askeladd ordered the raid of a nearby village. When even that haul proved insufficient, he ordered the massacre of every man, woman, and child to prevent survivors from alerting Thorkel. Despite this brutality, one girl escaped. Her warning reached Thorkel, making the slaughter ultimately futile. Knowing that Thorkel was closing in, Askeladd took another drastic step. He murdered Ragnar, Prince Canute's guardian. Ragnar's overprotection had sheltered Canute from reality, keeping him weak. Askeladd knew that without Ragnar, the prince might finally awaken to the harsh truths of leadership. Soon, Askeladd's own men turned on him. Driven by fear of Thorkel, they hoped to hand over Canute and save themselves. Only two remained: loyal Jorn, his steadfast right-hand man, and Thorfinn, the very boy who wanted him dead. Askeladd fought his own men, finally shedding all pretense and admitting he had always hated them for being weak, greedy Danes. Before he could be killed, Thorkel arrived. Disgusted by the cowardice of Askeladd's men, Thorkel slaughtered nearly all of them for robbing him of the thrill of a real battle. Askeladd was next, but Thorfinn intervened, challenging Thorkel to a duel. If Thorfinn won, both he and Askeladd would live, and Askeladd would owe him a third and final duel. Ironically, the very hatred Askeladd had once cultivated in Thorfinn was now the only thing keeping him alive. With Askeladd's help, Thorfinn defeated Thorkel. In the aftermath, a transformation occurred. Canute, shaken by Ragnar's death and awakened to his father's betrayal, resolved to become a king who would end suffering and oppression. He now understood his destiny. Either he would kill Sweyn, or Sweyn would kill him. Strengthened by this resolve, Canute gained Thorkel's respect and allegiance. The new alliance returned to Gainsborough to prepare for the Imperial Council. Askeladd knew politics required subtlety. To sway public opinion against Sweyn, he staged a false assassination attempt on Canute, hiring a killer to attack a decoy. The assassin killed a slave girl dressed as Canute, and Thorfinn, in turn, killed the assassin. More sacrifices, more death. But all for the dream that never died to save Wales. And yet, Askeladd's greatest sacrifice was still to come. A father's echo, a son's curse. As the Imperial Council approaches, Askeladd prepares to honor the promise he made to Thorfinn: one last duel. Weakened but unflinching, he faces the boy he raised through blood and steel. The fight, however, is one-sided. Askeladd defeats Thorfinn with ease, not because he's stronger, but because Thorfinn is still ruled by his emotions. Still that wounded child swinging blindly at the ghost of his father's killer. Seeing the pain in the boy's eyes, Askeladd does something unexpected. He doesn't gloat, doesn't taunt. Instead, he speaks. He tells Thorfinn the truth of his own childhood, the cruelty of his Viking father, the suffering of his Welsh mother, and the slow, burning hatred that shaped his life. He doesn't tell it to justify himself, but to offer Thorfinn a mirror, to help him see that they are more alike than he wants to admit. Both forged in violence, both trapped in cycles inherited from broken men. Askeladd knows what he is, a product of hatred, a man who became the very monster he once sought to destroy. But in sharing this, he hopes to give Thorfinn a chance to break free. Thorfinn, however, isn't ready. He rejects the truth, rejects the reflection. All he can cling to is the belief that killing Askeladd will bring him peace, an illusion Askeladd once believed himself. Still, the duel is over. Askeladd stands victorious for the third and final time, and with Thorfinn on the ground, conflicted, bitter, lost, Askeladd turns toward the greater battle ahead. The pieces are in place. The council awaits. If he plays it right, the boy may yet be saved. And perhaps through Canute wails too, a villain's last virtue at the Imperial Council. Just as Askeladd had orchestrated, the court and nobles began suspecting that King Sweyn intended to eliminate his son, Prince Canute. With that suspicion now public, the king couldn't move against Canute without turning the entire court against him. For once, it seemed Askeladd's plan to protect Wales and install Canute as a just ruler might actually succeed, but then it all unraveled. A messenger brought devastating news. The King of Wales had refused, for the second time, to become a vassal of the Danes. Sweyn, already paranoid, interpreted this as a budding rebellion and immediately declared that Wales would be invaded in the spring. Askeladd was stunned. He had devoted his entire life to reaching this point, to building enough influence, power, and proximity to royalty to someday shield his mother's people from the brutality of Viking conquest. And now, on the cusp of success, the land he longed to protect was once again under threat. Floki, commander of the Jomsvikings, noticed Askeladd's reaction and whispered to Sweyn, "Wiles is his weakness." Sweyn took the hint. With cruel cunning, the king praised Askeladd publicly for his honesty, then leaned in and delivered an ultimatum: Wiles or Canute. Choose one. Sweyn made it clear he didn't care about Wales. He just wanted Askeladd's loyalty in murdering his son. Then he dropped one final, venomous line: "The only thing Wales produces is slaves." Something in Askeladd snapped. In that moment, he saw the full weight of his life laid bare. Every betrayal, every murder, every innocent life he took, all of it had led to this, and none of it mattered. He had failed, unless he made one final sacrifice. Askeladd calmly drew his sword and pointed it at the king. He had played many roles in his life: slave's son, bastard, mercenary monster. But now, for the first time, he chose to be who he truly was. He announced his real name to the court, Lucius Artorius Castus, a name of legend, a name passed to him by his mother. In declaring it, he didn't just reveal his heritage, he claimed it. In one swift strike, he decapitated King Sweyn. Gasps and swords filled the hall. To protect Canute, he had to play the madman, to make it seem like this act of regicide was a solo delusion, not a coup. Yet even in his madness, this was the most honest Askeladd had ever been. He'd always loathed the Danes, despised their greed and bloodlust. He never truly belonged among them. This insanity was a mask, but behind it was a man finally unchained. Askeladd wasn't killing for power anymore. He was killing to protect, to buy peace with his own life. When Floki screamed, "You killed the king?" Askeladd smirked and replied, "What are you talking about? I'm right here, alive and well." It was genius. A final performance worthy of the tragedy he had lived. Askeladd's arc, once that of an irredeemable villain who killed a noble man like Thor's for gold, had come full circle. He was no longer just a villain or even an anti-hero. In that moment, he became the true protagonist. He couldn't undo the horrors of his past. But in his final act, he gave everything, his power, his identity, his life, to protect the people who had no one else. That's why this scene is the heart of Vinland Saga, because it shows that even a man drenched in sin can die a hero. That redemption doesn't always come through salvation, but through sacrifice. This wasn't just Askeladd's end. It was his freedom. When hate becomes purpose, Thorfinn, the story's apparent main character, arrives at the Imperial Council just in time to witness chaos. Askeladd, the man he swore to kill, is battling an entire room of Vikings. Desperate, Thorfinn leaps into action, determined once again to protect the very man who murdered his father, because it has to be him who kills Askeladd. But he's too late. Before he can reach them, Prince Canute drives his sword through Askeladd's heart. Just like that, Thorfinn's entire world collapses. His purpose, the only thing that's kept him breathing for years, has been taken from him. He trained, fought blood, and killed for the sole reason of one day defeating Askeladd in a fair duel. And now that final confrontation has been stolen. The closure he so desperately sought vanishes before his eyes. In that devastating moment, Thorfinn doesn't just mourn his revenge. He mourns Askeladd himself. He wants to save him. And that's the twist. All this time has Thorfinn only hated Askeladd. Is hatred really what kept him at his side, even as others betrayed him? Is that what pushed him to challenge Thorkel, the strongest warrior alive, just to protect him? Maybe Thorfinn's failure in their final duel wasn't just because of his blinding rage. Maybe on some level, he didn't want to win. Because without Askeladd, there is no Thorfinn. For all his cruelty, all his manipulation, Askeladd had become Thorfinn's purpose. More than that, he had become something of a second father. Twisted, toxic, and brutal, but constant. The only one who gave Thorfinn direction after the death of his real father. And now he's gone. Askeladd once told him, after their third duel, "You still can't kill me, even after all these years. Idiot." But maybe Askeladd wasn't mocking his fighting skills. Maybe he was pointing to the truth Thorfinn refused to accept, that he couldn't kill him, that he needed him. Thorfinn's love and hate for Askeladd were never separate. They were entangled. He hated him for taking his father, but he was also bound to him, addicted to the chase, dependent on the identity it gave him. Without that pursuit, without Askeladd, Thorfinn is lost. And that's exactly what happens. Askeladd dies, his arc complete, redeemed not by absolution but by sacrifice. And at that same moment, Thorfinn breaks completely. He snaps. When King Canute tries to speak to him, Thorfinn doesn't even hear. His grief and fury consume him. He lunges at the king, lashing out at the world because he doesn't know any other way to feel. His blade slashes Canute's face, leaving a scar that will mark this moment forever. Thorfinn is dragged away, screaming, clawing toward Askeladd's corpse, the last piece of who he was. And then comes the most haunting, poetic moment of all. He drops the knife. The same knife his father gave him, with the instruction to only use it for protection. A promise he broke the day he chose vengeance. As the blade hits the floor, we see flashes of the life he lost, his childhood, his innocence, his humanity, all stolen by the cycle of hate Askeladd embodied. The knife has no purpose anymore, neither does he. In the end, too, all Thorfinn wants is for Askeladd to rise again, just like he once begged for his father to survive. But this time, there's no escape, no duel, no redemption. His story began with the loss of a father, and it ends with the loss of another. Thorfinn's tragedy isn't just about revenges, it's about identity. And when Askeladd dies, he loses the last thread holding him together. He isn't a hero, he isn't a villain, he's just broken. And that's what makes Vinland Saga so powerful, because it isn't Askeladd's death that ends Thorfinn's arc. It's the meaning behind it. All right then, that is it for Season 1. Thorfinn is dead, not physically, but spiritually, emotionally. The boy who once sailed with fire in his chest and vengeance in his veins died the moment Askeladd did. That version of him, driven by rage, too, obsessed with revenge, was buried alongside the man he both hated and needed most. Askeladd wasn't just Thorfinn's enemy. He was everything, too. Mentor, tormentor, the shadow that defined his youth. In trying to kill him, Thorfinn gave his life shape. In failing to do so, he lost all meaning. When Askeladd was cut down, Thorfinn didn't just lose a target, he lost the only structure holding up his world. What remains is a husk, a listless shell drifting through days without direction. He doesn't speak unless spoken to. He moves because he's told to. He exists, but he's no longer alive. His hatred is gone, but it left behind something worse: guilt. The kind of guilt that stains every quiet moment. Guilt for the sons he turned into corpses, the fathers he slaughtered without hesitation, all in pursuit of a grudge that never gave him peace. It's not that Thorfinn's just depressed. He's hollowed. The light is gone from his eyes. There is no joy, no future he looks forward to. He wakes, works, sleeps, only because his body still knows how to. When he killed, it was for his father. But in becoming a killer, he murdered the very ideals his father stood for. That realization guts him. He knows how much it hurt to lose Thors. And through that pain, he became the kind of man who brought that same suffering to countless others. It breaks him. And in that brokenness, he sees the truth that a warrior's pride built on blood is nothing but blindness. Thorfinn is no longer proud. He is not even angry. He's ashamed. Shamed by the weight of his past and terrified that no act, no matter how noble, can ever wash the blood from his hands. Redemption, if it exists, is a mountain without a summit, but even so, he walks. That's the Thorfinn we meet after Askeladd, not a warrior, not a boy, but a ghost trying to find a reason to live again, because he didn't just die once. He died, and now he's trying to be reborn. Einar, the man who taught Thorfinn to feel again, Einar, the earnest and resilient farmer turned slave, emerges as one of the most pivotal figures in Vinland Saga. More than just a supporting character, Einar becomes the emotional anchor and moral compass that guides Thorfinn through his most painful and transformative. While Thorfinn's journey from vengeance, blinded warrior to a man of peace stands as the central thread of the story, it's Einar's unwavering humanity that quietly forges the crucible in which Thorfinn's redemption is born. Introduced in the Vinland Saga arc, Einar enters the narrative not as a warrior or political player, but as a victim. A man whose peaceful life as a farmer with his mother and sister is shattered when the Danes raid his village, murdering his loved ones in front of him and selling him into slavery. The tragedy he endures is raw, personal, and utterly human. Unlike Thorfinn, who became numb and hollow after years of violence, Einar remains emotionally present. He suffers, he still feels, he despairs, but he still hopes. Their meeting is quiet, even unremarkable at first. Two slaves on Ketil's farm, bound by circumstance but divided by experience. Einar represents everything Thorfinn left behind when he chose a life of bloodshed, community, innocence, and the ability to dream. Thorfinn, shattered by the death of Askeladd, his nemesis, mentor, and final anchor, has become an empty shell. His hatred died with Askeladd, and what remains is a husk who neither seeks freedom nor purpose. Einar's attempts to befriend him are met with silence, but he refuses to give up. This contrast, Einar's hope against Thorfinn's apathy, is no coincidence. Yukimura constructs Einar as a foil, a mirror to the emotional vacuum Thorfinn has become. Einar's joy at growing wheat, his delight in simple pleasures, and his ability to laugh despite the chains he wears serve as constant, unspoken challenges to Thorfinn's detachment. They are both victims of violence, but only one of them has chosen to keep his heart open. The breakthrough comes when Einar discovers the truth, that Thorfinn was a warrior, a killer, and part of the very army that destroyed his own family. Overcome with rage, Einar tries to kill him. But Thorfinn's tortured screams as he awakens, haunted by the lives he took, stun him into stopping. Einar sees not a monster, but a man drowning in grief, screaming nightly in a personal hell he can't escape. It's a moment of grace that redefines their relationship. Einar doesn't forgive Thorfinn with words or absolve him through grand gestures. He simply stays. And in that act, he becomes the first person in years to truly see Thorfinn as more than his sins. This is where Einar's role becomes something deeper. He doesn't save Thorfinn with ideology, he saves him with patience. Through labor, laughter, and honest frustration, Einar pulls Thorfinn back into the world of the living. He reminds him of the value of building rather than destroying, of touching the earth and growing something with your hands. He teaches him that a man can be strong without violence, and that peace isn't cowardice, it's a choice, a hard one. As Thorfinn rediscovers his humanity, the dream of Vinland, a land of peace he once heard about in childhood, resurfaces. But this time, it isn't just an abstract idea. It becomes a shared goal. For Thorfinn, Vinland is the expression of his atonement. For Einar, it's the hope of a world where families like his can live without fear. Together, they give the dream flesh, anchored in sweat, tears, and belief. Their dynamic also evolves. Once just master and fellow slave, then strangers and unlikely companions, they become something rarer equals. Brothers in arms, not of war, but of rebuilding. Einar's steady presence and emotional openness offer Thorfinn a path not just away from the battlefield, but toward something meaningful. Toward a life that matters. Even as Thorfinn embraces pacifism, Einar remains grounded. He isn't idealistic to the point of naivety. He questions Thorfinn's absolute refusal to fight, pushes back when it doesn't make sense, and reminds us that pacifism in a violent world is complex. Einar's own anger, his desire for justice, never fully vanish. But unlike the old Thorfinn, Einar doesn't let rage consume him. He chooses compassion without letting go of his convictions. In the end, Einar is more than just Thorfinn's friend. He is the spark that reignites his soul, the voice that says, "You still matter." The man who, without knowing it, teaches a former killer how to be human again. Through Einar, Vinland Saga stops being a story about vengeance and becomes a story about hope, about how, even in a world of blood and ruin, the quiet strength of empathy can lead someone back from the edge. Einar lives in his emotions. Thorfinn once lived in his violence. And together, they begin to build something new. Not just a farm, a future. Einar and Thorfinn, a reflection from place. When Thorfinn and Einar first meet on Ketil's farm, it isn't a clash of personalities or ideals. It's the quiet collision of two broken men, both burdened by grief, but in different stages of collapse. Thorfinn is hollow, a shell left behind after decades of bloodshed, and the spiritual death that followed Askeladd's demise. Einar, on the other hand, still bleeds when he's cut. He still feels anger, sorrow, hope. He hasn't yet buried those parts of himself. And it's that contrast, one man completely numb, the other still painfully alive, that begins to crack Thorfinn's frozen interior. They don't bond over shared ideology or emotional vulnerability at first. They bond over labor. They suffer under the same sun, sleep on the same straw, are punished by the same system. They live in the same silence. And in that silence, Yukimura does something most storytellers are afraid to do. He lets nothing happen, but that nothing is everything. It is presence. It is the first breath of something human. The real shift begins when Einar, unable to sit in that silence any longer, lets his pain surface. He tells his story, how his village was destroyed, how his family was taken. And the moment lands like a hammer, not just for the reader, but for Thorfinn himself, because it's exactly what he used to do. The horror that Einar lived through was the life Thorfinn once handed out. But instead of hate, Einar offers openness. He doesn't demand vengeance. He creates space for empathy. It's the first time Thorfinn sees his past reflected back at him, not through rage or condemnation, but through raw humanity. And that changes everything. This isn't Thor's preaching from a place of moral high ground. This is a fellow slave, a victim, offering a hand instead of a weapon. That's what makes Einar different. That's what makes him essential. Eventually, Thorfinn breaks. Not with dramatics, not with violence, but with honesty. He speaks of the nightmares, the blood, the endless screaming in his head. He lays it bare, and Einar doesn't flinch. He doesn't run. He listens. And then he says, "We're the same." That moment carries more weight than any duel in the series. It's not about redemption. It's about grace. It's about being seen. For the first time in his life, Thorfinn is not just forgiven, he's understood. And in that understanding, the story shifts from one about vengeance to one about rebirth. Later, when Thorfinn is forced to fight the farmhands, he moves like the killer he once was, quick, precise, unstoppable. And it sickens him, because it reminds him of the void he escaped. That night, he dreams of the dead. All of them. They mock him. They swarm him. And Askeladd stands at the center of it all, daring him to pretend he can change. That dream isn't just trauma. It's the core of his guilt made manifest. It's the clearest message yet. If Thorfinn stays on this path, he won't build anything. He'll rot in a grave of his own making. So he vows never again. No more blood. No more fists, too. And it's not a vow born of virtue. It's survival. It's desperation. It's the only way forward. And yet, the road forward isn't clean. Thorfinn doesn't become a pacifist overnight. He becomes a farmer. He builds. He fails. He learns. And through it all, Einar is there. Not as a mentor, not as a sidekick, as a brother. Their bond isn't decorative, stational. They fight, they laugh, they cry. They build a future, and through that, Vinland becomes more than a myth. It becomes a promise. A place where no one has to raise a sword to survive. A place worth bleeding for. Not in battle, but in planting, in healing. But the world doesn't let go so easily. Canute's ambitions, the politics of kingship, and the scars of Thorfinn's past all come knocking, and Yukimura doesn't protect him from that. Choosing peace isn't a spell. It's a constant fight against the world's pull toward violence. That's what makes it powerful. That's what makes it real. Einar is the ground where Thorfinn's humanity takes root. Without Einar, there's no awakening, no vow, no dream of Vinland. Thorfinn may be the lead, but Einar is the reason the story didn't end in silence. He's the reason it had a second act. Canute's arc in Vinland Saga is a stroke of narrative brilliance. Yukimura doesn't just write a good character. He constructs a deliberate foil to Thorfinn that evolves in perfect counterpoint. Their journeys mirror each other, not in sync, but in reverse. When Thorfinn and Canute first meet, they stand on opposite ends of the emotional and moral spectrum. Thorfinn is all blood and steel, a young beast forged in the furnace of vengeance, with nothing but death etched into his soul. Canute, on the other hand, is fragile, timid, gentle, and almost ethereal. He's terrified of the world, visibly shrinking under its cruelty, clinging to faith and dreams of peace like a child clutches a blanket in the dark. But time changes them, or rather, time and pain sculpt them into reflections of what the other used to be. Thorfinn, who once viewed pacifism as cowardice and mercy as weakness, is stripped of everything: his rage, his purpose, his enemies, until all that remains is a raw, hollow man who has to rebuild his soul from the ground up. He finds meaning in labor, in peace, in the quiet dignity of living without hurting others. Thorfinn becomes the embodiment of nonviolence, not because he was born that way, but because he earned it through suffering and shame. Meanwhile, Canute's transformation is the darker one. The boy who once trembled behind others now walks ahead of armies, wearing a crown built on sacrifice. But the price he pays is staggering. To achieve his dream of a peaceful world, he throws himself into the very violence he once feared. He poisons his own brother, someone he loved, to secure a kingdom. He becomes cold, methodical, even ruthless. What began as a dream for utopia curdles into a crusade justified by ends that will never come. Canute tells himself that all of it, murder, war, conquest, is necessary to purge suffering from the world. But the irony is cruel. He becomes the very thing that created his suffering in the first place. Thorfinn, the killer, becomes the pacifist. Canute, the dreamer, becomes the tyrant. By the time they meet again, they've traded lives. Thorfinn returns as a man who sees no enemies. Canute stands as a king who sees only obstacles. And it's in that collision, where sword meets word, and warlord faces idealist, that Vinland Saga reaches its true philosophical battlefield. Canute's tragedy is that he believes salvation can be won with blood, that if he just conquers enough, sacrifices enough, kills enough, he can build paradise atop a mountain of corpses. But the truth that Thorfinn discovers and Canute rejects is that hate breeds hate. The world cannot be remade with the same tools that broke it. What Yukimura does here is genius. This isn't just two characters developing, it's two ideologies taking shape and colliding. It's pacifism tested in the face of tyranny. It's the burden of power versus the burden of guilt. And it's art of the highest kind, where character arcs don't just evolve, they interlock. They become reflections, distortions, and arguments within the same world. By the end, Canute is no longer the boy who prayed for peace. He's the king who believes peace must be enforced. And Thorfinn is no longer the boy who lived for war. He's the man who would rather die than raise a blade again. Ketil's collapse, the hollow power of a self-made lie. Ketil's arc in Vinland Saga is one of the most quietly devastating in the entire series, not because of grand betrayal or tragic nobility, but because of how thoroughly it exposes the lie of a man who built his entire identity on shallow myth. Unlike Thorfinn or Canute, Ketil doesn't undergo transformation. He doesn't evolve, rise, or fall from grace. He simply decays, rotting in place as the world demands more of him than he's ever been able to give. At the surface, Ketil is a wealthy landowner with status and property. He has laborers under him, soldiers protecting his estate, and the ear of the royal court. But all of that is a veneer, propped up by one ridiculous lie that he was once Ketil the Iron Fist, a legendary warrior feared across the land. This identity is so hollow that even his own sons don't fully buy into it. Thorgil, his eldest, is a legitimate warrior, cruel, zealous, and fully immersed in the Viking ideal of glory through violence. He worships the myth, not the man. Olmar, the younger son, too, is a weakling desperate for validation, trying to live up to a standard that never existed in the first place. Ketil is a father who built a family on fantasy, and it's rotting them all from the inside. His trip to Jelling is where the illusion begins to collapse completely. Ketil arrives bearing gifts for King Harald, hoping to reaffirm loyalty and secure favor. But the king is already dead, assassinated by his own brother, Canute. Ketil is so far removed from real power that he doesn't even know the game has changed until he's already walked into it. What follows is political exploitation at its cleanest. Canute, needing to fund a standing army to keep England in check, decides to confiscate the lands of the wealthy without raising taxes. He looks at Ketil and sees exactly what he needs: soft power, easy to seize, dressed up in delusions of strength. And Ketil plays right into it. He offers his gifts, tries to impress Canute, and even lets Olmar audition for the King's Guard. When Olmar fails spectacularly, Canute doesn't get angry. He sees an opportunity. He fabricates a justification to seize Ketil's estate, framing it as state business. This is where the world catches up to Ketil's lie. What's so brutal is that Ketil doesn't respond with clarity. He doesn't rally like a real leader, doesn't outmaneuver or even beg effectively. He goes home and tries to become the Iron Fist overnight, yelling empty orders and demanding loyalty from people who've never seen him fight. Snake, a true warrior and the only man of actual authority on the farm, sees through it instantly and slaps him down. Even his slaves, Thorfinn and Einar, watch in contempt as he pretends to be something he's not. He's not respected. He's not feared. He's not even pitied. He's just in the way. When the king's army eventually arrives, Ketil breaks. He shouts, blusters, swings wildly, and finally runs his legacy, land, and myth fall apart in real time. And his descent into madness isn't tragic in the Shakespearean sense. It's embarrassing. His mind fractures not from loss of power, but from the confrontation with the truth that he never had it to begin with. Ketil is a study in performative masculinity, in the kind of quiet, generational rot that seeps in when pride replaces principle. He isn't a villain. He isn't noble. He's just a man who built his life on a legend, and when history demanded proof, he had nothing but stories and soft hands. Vinland Saga doesn't give him a climactic death or a redemptive arc. It lets him sit in the filth of his own delusion and lose everything. And that's the point. He serves as a warning. In a narrative filled with men facing their demons, Ketil is the one who refuses. And in doing so, he becomes not the iron fist, but the hollow palm of a man crushed by a world that no longer has space for his self-made fantasy. The raw kindness Ketil and the illusion of the good slave master. Ketil is one of the most disturbing characters in Vinland Saga precisely because he doesn't fit the stereotype of a villain. He's not some cackling sadist reveling in pain, nor a tyrant obsessed with control. On the surface, he's soft-spoken, considerate, even generous. To his male slaves, he offers a deal that seems shockingly humane: work 3 years, and you can buy your freedom. 2. In a world built on brutality, that offer makes Ketil seem, if not kind, then at least merciful. And that's exactly what makes him dangerous. Ketil's entire identity is built on lies. His myth? The fearsome, iron fist Ketil isn't just propaganda to keep others in line. It's a mask he wears to convince himself he's a man of strength and worth. In truth, Ketil is terrified of confrontation. He's a man whose power has never been tested because it never had to be. His wealth did the talking, and the fear he borrowed from a legend kept the peace. But when the myth is shattered, when the king declares him an enemy of the state, when the war comes home, there's nothing underneath but a man crumbling under the weight of a truth he was never built to face. That slow decay reaches its cruelest point in his relationship with Arnheid. She's the only one he shows his true self to. Not out of trust, but out of weakness. He confuses vulnerability with love, and in his mind, her presence justifies his entire illusion. She's his comfort, his escape, his prize. What makes it horrifying is that he truly believes he loves her, but that love is conditional on obedience. When she tries to flee, not just with any man, but with her enslaved husband, Ketil isn't hurt because he's been wronged. He's hurt because the fantasy he built has cracked open. His violence isn't born from hatred. It's born from entitlement. Ketil believes he gave her everything. Shelter, kinness, a place in his home. And when she dares to act like a human being with her own love and agency, he reacts the way all slave owners eventually do when their power is threatened. He punishes her for daring to want freedom. The beating he gives her isn't just physical violence, it's a psychological collapse. He can't handle the reality that she never loved him back, that he never owned anything real, only a performance. Arnheid tells him she's pregnant with his child. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's not. It doesn't matter. In his madness, Ketil can't distinguish between truth and paranoia anymore. He sees betrayal everywhere because betrayal to him is any act of defiance. Any will that isn't his, so he keeps hitting her. And in doing so, he murders not just a child, but the last remnant of the man he pretended to be. Ketil's story is brutal not because of how monstrous he becomes, but because of how ordinary that descent is. He shows how even someone gentle, even someone empathetic, becomes violent and destructive when handed absolute power over another human being. His violence doesn't come from cruelty, it comes from fragility, from insecurity, from the need to protect the illusion of control. That's the horror. Vinland Saga doesn't let Ketil off the hook. It doesn't give him redemption or closure. He isn't some misunderstood antihero. He's proof that the very structure of slavery turns all masters, no matter how kind, into monsters the moment their will is challenged. Because power built on domination always comes at the cost of another person's humanity. And once someone sees their slave as property, everything else, love, respect, compassion, is warped beyond recognition. Ketil isn't the exception. He's the rule hiding in plain sight. And Yukimura makes sure we see it for what it is, not a tragic love story, but the inevitable consequence of a system that destroys everyone it touches. Arnheid, the quiet despair that demands a reason to live. Arnheid's story in Vinland Saga is not just a subplot. It's the raw, emotional core of the farmland arc's quiet brutality. Her life is a slow, burning tragedy that reflects the fate of many forgotten victims of war, those who are punished not for the wrongs they commit, but for the wrongs committed around them. She is one of the most compassionate, emotionally intelligent characters in the entire series, and the world punishes her for it at every turn. Her suffering begins long before she appears on the page. Arnheid was once a free woman, a wife, and a mother. Her husband, Gardar, like many men intoxicated by the promise of wealth and status, took up arms in a doomed battle. Arnheid opposed it. She saw the futility and danger in it. But her voice, like that of so many women in her world, held no weight. Her husband gambled their future and lost, and Arnheid became property, a sex slave to Ketil. And with that, her identity, freedom, and agency were stripped away years later when Gardar returns as a runaway slave. It's not a romantic reunion. It's complicated, desperate, and messy. Arnheid doesn't leap into his arms. She tends to him like a stranger, someone familiar, yes, but someone who abandoned her to rot in silence. And yet, despite everything, she still cannot watch him suffer. Her humanity overrides her fear. Her care, her tears give Gardar just enough strength to lash out and kill one of Snake's men. That single moment of mercy sets off a chain of violence that ends in even more death. And in the end, Gardar dies in her arms, not as the warrior who left, but as a man broken by what he had seen and done. When he says that he would never let their son grow up to be a soldier, you can see it in her eyes. She sees the man he could have been. For one fleeting moment, she gets a glimpse of the life she always dreamed of: a simple, peaceful home, a husband who understands, a child safe from war. But it's just that, a moment. Because in Vinland Saga, remorse comes too late. The world doesn't wait for you to grow wise. It swallows you whole before you can even change. Arnheid's end is as senseless as it is inevitable. After she tries to escape with her dying husband, she is beaten within an inch of her life. Ketil, who once pretended to be a good slave master, destroys the very person he claimed to love, all because she dared to seek her own freedom. Her unborn child is killed in the process. Her body breaks. But what's worse is how her will dies with it. When Thorfinn and Einar try to rescue her, she no longer wants saving. She asks a question no one is prepared to answer. Why do I have to be alive? In that moment, Vinland Saga stops being a story about revenge, freedom, or dreams. It becomes a question of survival. What does it mean to keep living when everything has been taken from you? Einar tells her he loves her, that he needs her, but even love is too fragile here. Arnheid dies not just from her injuries, but from the quiet knowledge that love, in her world, has only ever led to loss. And this is where Thorfinn's journey gains its deepest meaning. Arnheid's death is not an outlier. It's a reminder of the millions like her, silenced, enslaved, broken by systems too large to fight. If Thorfinn's dream of Vinland, a land without war or slavery, seems naive, it's only because the world has made peace feel like a fantasy. But people like Arnheid are the reason he has to try. Her life was reduced to suffering, but her memory becomes part of the foundation for something better. Thorfinn must build a world where no one has to ask, why do I have to live? A world where that question always has an answer. Snake 2. The villain who keeps his oath, Snake, is another of the most complex figures in the farmland arc. Not because he's good, but because he refuses to be simple. He enters the story as what looks like another leech clinging to power. The captain of Ketil's personal guard, lounging around, smirking, doing the bare minimum. But when things fall apart, Snake doesn't flee. He steps up, reveals a strict internal code, and chooses to honor an oath even if it drags him into the mud. The most fascinating part of Snake's character is how clearly he knows he's not a good man. He admits without hesitation that he and his men are criminals, scumbags really. He doesn't dress it up or pretend otherwise. What he does do is tether himself to a principle. He lives by a personal code of loyalty and order, and once he gives someone his word, like Ketil, that word becomes law. Even as Ketil spirals into madness, beats a pregnant woman half to death, and prepares to lead a suicidal resistance against Nut's army, Snake doesn't abandon him. He stays. Not because Ketil deserves it, but because Snake believes that keeping your promise matters even when it destroys you. In a vacuum, that's an admirable trait. But context makes it twisted. Snake is honorable in the service of evil. He's not killing innocents out of sadism. He's doing it because it's the duty assigned to him. This warped sense of honor creates a character who's terrifyingly loyal, but also not quite heartless. He tries to do right by the rules he's chosen, but he's chosen them in a rotten system. This tension makes the confrontation between Snake and Thorfinn one of the most powerful moments in the arc. Gardar, Arnheid's husband, has killed 5 of Snake's men while escaping. By Snake's rules, Gardar must die. Thorfinn doesn't want more death. He's walked away from that path. But to stop Snake, he has to fight. And so the former killer, now pacifist, breaks his vow not to kill, but to protect. Unarmed and resolved, he fights a fully equipped Snake to delay a killing. In that fight, Snake is all instinct and precision, a man trained in bloodshed. Thorfinn, however, is something else. He doesn't want to win. He wants to stop violence entirely, but he fails. Gardar dies. And it haunts Thorfinn, not because he lost, but because he couldn't find a third way. That moment crystallizes the entire arc's theme. Is there a path between surrender and violence? Can honor mean more than loyalty to power? Snake respects Thorfinn. He sees the strength in him, not just as a fighter, but as a man with principles. And Thorfinn doesn't hate Snake either. That's what makes it all so tragic. These are men who could have been allies in another life. But Snake is locked into the logic of oaths and structure, and Thorfinn is clawing his way out of it. They are opposites, one bound to his sword, the other trying to bury his. Snake isn't a villain in the way most stories write them. He's not cruel, not power, hungry. He's disciplined, committed. And that's what makes him dangerous. Because sometimes the most evil acts aren't done by monsters, but by men who believe they're simply doing what they must. Thorfinn's punches, the first method in action, after Arnheid's death, a moment that crystallizes how deep human suffering runs in a world ruled by power. Thorfinn makes a decision that shifts the course of Vinland Saga. He refuses to let the cycle of violence claim anyone else. No more fighting, no more running. It's time to try the first method. Not strength, not surrender, but sacrifice. Thorfinn asks to speak with King Canute, hoping to stop the invasion and spare innocent lives. But he's denied. There's no throne side welcome for a former warrior turned pacifist. Instead, he's given an absurd challenge by one of the soldiers. If he can survive 100 punches without dying or falling unconscious, he'll be granted an audience with the king. A lesser man would see this as humiliation. A former Thorfinn would have answered with a blade. But this version of him, he accepts willingly. What follows isn't just a beating, it's a statement. Thorfinn stands still, body open, fists flying at his face and torso again and again. He doesn't block. He doesn't retaliate. He doesn't curse. Because this isn't about proving how strong he is. It's about proving what strength means. This is Thorfinn becoming the embodiment of his new belief that there are no enemies. Not even the men striking him deserve his hatred. Unlike other warrior stories, where the climax is a blood-soaked duel or a battlefield conquest, Thorfinn's moment of truth is quiet, brutal, and symbolic. he doesn't raise a sword to Canute. He absorbs the pain of others so no one else has to suffer. It's self-destruction for the sake of peace. And when he finally collapses, body broken, but will intact, he's granted the meeting. This scene turns the idea of a warrior on its head. Thorfinn doesn't earn respect through violence, but through endurance, through his refusal to hate. In that moment, he becomes a mirror of what he once despised, someone who'd rather die than kill. He walks the line between pacifist and martyr, choosing pain not as a punishment, but as a path. These punches aren't just physical blows, they're proof that Thorfinn is willing to carry the burden of peace himself. He understands the price of violence because he's paid it, and now he's determined to create a world where no one else has to. This isn't about being forgiven. It's about proving that forgiveness can be stronger than vengeance. Thorfinn vis Canute, an argument for peace, not power. The reunion between Thorfinn and Canute is one of the most philosophically loaded and emotionally restrained clashes in Vinland Saga. It isn't a duel of swords or a test of brute strength. It's an ideological confrontation between two men who were once buoyed by war, loss, and impossible dreams. They are now on opposite ends of the spectrum, yet staring at the same horizon. Thorfinn stands as the embodiment of peace, calm, centered, and pacifistic, the man Canute once aspired to become when he dreamed of building a better world. In contrast, Canute has become the very image of the strength Thorfinn once craved, a powerful, commanding king who uses violence as a tool to craft his version of paradise. But despite their mirrored transformations, their goal is the same: to build a world free of war and slavery. That's what makes this meeting not just dramatic, but poetic. When Canute declares that his true enemy is not the English, nor rival kings, nor even himself, but God, it reframes his ambition. He sees God as the architect of suffering, the creator who gave humanity the free will to inflict endless pain, and left them with plagues, hunger, too, and the instinct to dominate. For Canute, creating a peaceful world is not just a political goal, it's a rebellion against the divine. And to do that, he believes he must kill, conquer, and suppress. This is where Thorfinn's approach breaks him. After enduring punches just to earn a chance to speak, not to threaten, not to manipulate, but simply to ask for peace, Thorfinn shows Canute that selflessness still exists in a world drenched in blood. Canute expects threats, bargaining, or some clever scheme. Instead, he's met with a man who is willing to walk away rather than raise a hand. It stuns him. Thorfinn, once a feared warrior driven by vengeance, now refuses to even see enemies. Canute, hardened by kingship, assumes everyone is an enemy. This contrast doesn't lead to another clash. It leads to a realization. Thorfinn's existence proves something Canute had lost hope in. That peace can be lived, not just pursued, through control and violence. When Thorfinn says he will simply walk away, Canute is forced to reevaluate everything. It's not a tactical move. It's not a performance. It's a raw, honest rejection of the kill or be killed mindset that rules kingdoms. And in that moment, Canute realizes he doesn't need more power. He needs someone like Thorfinn beside him. Someone who can do what he can't. Someone who can live the peace he only dreams of enforcing. Their meeting doesn't end with a treaty or a war. It ends with mutual recognition. Canute sees an ally, not an obstacle. And Thorfinn proves that peace isn't a fantasy. It's a reality one person can choose to embody, no matter the cost. Where Canute's path leads him to power through sacrifice, Thorfinn's leads him to peace through suffering. Two roads diverging, but still walking toward the same dream. Conclusion: the weight of peace of Vinland Saga isn't just a story about war, revenge, or redemption. It's about the impossible effort to break generational violence and become something new in a world built on blood. At the center of it all is Thorfinn, not as a warrior, but as a man trying to be better, haunted by ghosts, bound by guilt, yet choosing to build instead of destroy. Every character, Ketil, Snake, Gardar, Arnheid, Einar, and Canute, serves as a mirror, testing the strength of that vow. Yukimura crafts a story where ideals are sharpened by suffering and love is far harder than hate. The Farmland arc proves that peace is not passive. It's the most active, painful, and radical choice a person can make in a brutal world. And by the time we reach the shores of Vinland, we aren't just witnessing Thorfinn's rebirth, we're invited to believe in it. And as such, Vinland Saga stands among the greats not because it glorifies violence, but because it dares to ask what comes after. It looks you in the eye and says, "You've seen enough blood. Now what will you build?" It doesn't offer easy answers. It doesn't wrap trauma in platitudes. Instead, it lets you live with its characters, sweat beside them, mourn with them, and just maybe hope with them. And in a medium crowded with battles and spectacle, Vinland Saga carves out its legacy with something far more rarer honesty. Okay, that is the end of the video. But hey, before I go, just a quick intro about myself. This was my very first video on this channel, and if you made it all the way here, you're already one of my favorite people. I'm Alex, short for Alexis, but literally no one calls me that except maybe my dentist. I've always been obsessed with stories, whether it's in games like Red Dead or Vinland Saga, movies that make me cry at 3 a.m. Also, yes, I know I probably butchered some pronunciations. Please go easy on me. I swear I'm trying. I'm still figuring out how to talk like a functioning human in front of a mic. Okay? Huge thanks to my girl Krista for editing this and making it look way better than my ramen-stained script deserved. I'm planning to make more videos like this, breakdowns, essays, rambles, basically anything that lets me geek out about stories. In between that, I love taste testing spicy ramen that could probably burn a hole in your soul, fixing my bike while blasting cringy anime openings, or repainting my nails in some shade called Midnight Murder. So yeah, if you liked this, subscribe, drop a comment, and maybe tell me what stories have shaped you. I'll see you again real soon. Peace.